For 52 years, Sylvia built a flawless fortress for her family. Her reward? When her wealthy husband died, her own eldest son legally evicted her, drained her accounts, and trapped her in a sterile, one-bedroom apartment with a strict allowance. He thought she was just a fragile, grieving widow who would fade away quietly. But William made one fatal mistake. He missed a single, misdelivered envelope from California. An envelope that contained a 35-year-old secret, a hidden waterfront estate, and the exact paper trail Sylvia needed to completely destroy her son's life. A woman spends 52 years building a fortress for her family. She irons shirts, orchestrates holiday dinners, and nurses sick children through the night. Her ultimate reward is a sterile, one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. The phone never rings. Visitors never arrive. This is not a story about elder abuse committed by strangers. This is the anatomy of a hostile takeover. It was executed flawlessly by the people she loved most. Sylvia married Arthur in 1968. They established a silent, binding contract. It was the standard arrangement for their generation. Sylvia would manage the domestic sphere. She would raise their 3 children and maintain their social standing in the community. Arthur would generate the income. He would handle the investments, the taxes, and the legalities. Sylvia executed her half of the bargain with absolute precision. Their 4-bedroom colonial house ran like a Swiss watch. She never asked to see a bank statement. She never questioned an investment portfolio. Trust was the absolute foundation of her reality. She believed her future was completely secure. She traded her earning potential for the promise of lifelong protection. Then, Arthur died. A sudden heart attack took him in his late 70s. The grief paralyzed Sylvia. She lost her partner, her routine, and her compass. The funeral was a blur of dark suits and whispered condolences. Before the flowers on the grave had even wilted, the family dynamic fundamentally shifted. Her eldest son, William, stepped forward. He was a successful corporate attorney. He spoke in soothing, measured tones. He told his mother she needed rest. He insisted the large family house was a physical and emotional hazard for a grieving widow. William offered to handle the probate process. He volunteered to manage the estate taxes. He placed thick stacks of legal documents on the mahogany dining table. He pointed a gold pen at the dotted lines. Sylvia signed her name. She did not read the fine print. She did not hire her own lawyer. She looked across the table and saw a devoted son. She believed he was shielding his mother from bureaucratic stress. The execution of his plan was remarkably swift. Within 3 months, the family home was listed and sold. The antique furniture went to an estate auction. The cherished family heirlooms were quietly divided among the 3 children. Sylvia was relocated. William chose the new residence. It was a modern, highly efficient apartment in a senior living complex. He called the decision practical. He assured her the building was safe. The door closed behind the movers, and a crushing silence rushed in. The illusion of family care evaporated almost instantly. The traditional Sunday dinners ceased. The phone calls dwindled to brief, hurried check-ins on major holidays. Sylvia slowly realized the true cost of her signatures. She had signed away all access to her own financial resources. William now controlled the family trust. He set up a modest monthly allowance for his mother. The automatic transfer covered her groceries and basic utility bills. It left nothing extra. If Sylvia needed a new winter coat, she had to call William. She had to justify the expense. She had to ask for permission to spend the money her husband had earned. She was entirely stripped of her agency. Her entire adult identity was tied to being a caretaker and a matriarch. Now, she had no home to manage. She had no family to host. More importantly, she had no power to make independent decisions. She could not buy a plane ticket to visit a friend. She could not donate to her favorite charity. She was a dependent guest in her own life. The children she raised had systematically dismantled her independence. They weaponized her grief. They disguised absolute financial control as filial compassion. Sylvia sat in her beige living room. She watched the seasons change through a single, square window. She accepted this bleak reality. She believed Arthur must have left them struggling financially. She trusted William's narrative of necessary economic prudence. The 52-year marital deal felt like a tragic failure. She assumed the money simply was not there. She had no reason to suspect otherwise. She had no proof of any deception. She only harbored a deep, quiet sense of unease. Then, the mail carrier misdelivered a single envelope. What could compel a devoted husband to secretly pay for a storage unit in a city he had never visited? For 35 years, Arthur maintained a flawless image. He was a loyal partner. He was a respected architect. He never took unannounced business trips. Yet, a mundane piece of mail shattered that carefully constructed reality. Sylvia spent the last 8 months in a thick fog of grief. Her eldest son, William, systematically took charge of her existence. He managed the estate. He handled the bank accounts. He filtered her phone calls. He called it protecting his mother. Sylvia accepted this invisible cage. She believed she was too fragile to face the outside world alone. Her daily routine shrank to the walls of her living room. The incoming mail was strictly intercepted by William. He visited every Tuesday to sort the envelopes. He discarded what he deemed unnecessary. A heavy winter storm delayed William's weekly visit. The local postman dropped a single, misrouted envelope directly into Sylvia's box. It lacked a return address. The postmark read, Sacramento, California. Arthur despised the West Coast. He frequently complained about the climate and the culture. Sylvia opened the envelope. Inside lay a simple, formal invoice. It demanded a renewal payment for a climate-controlled storage facility. The billing cycle covered the next 12 months. The name on the account was Arthur Pendleton. The billing address was a private post office box in Sacramento. Sylvia stared at the paper. The amount was substantial, $4,200. The invoice noted a continuous rental history dating back 3.5 decades. The math did not align with her memories. 35 years ago, she was pregnant with their youngest daughter. Arthur claimed he was struggling to keep his firm afloat during that exact period. He insisted on extreme financial frugality. They skipped family vacations. They delayed essential house repairs. Meanwhile, he was funding a secret, premium space across the country. William called later that afternoon. He promised to come by the next morning to handle the legal paperwork. He specifically asked if any bank statements had arrived in the mail. Sylvia looked at the Sacramento invoice, resting on her kitchen counter. A strange clarity washed over her mind. The heavy sorrow vanished. She folded the paper. She slid it inside her favorite cookbook. She told William the mailbox was completely empty. It was her first lie to her son. It was her first deliberate act of defiance. The passive widow retreated. A cold, analytical focus took her place. Sylvia needed concrete answers. She could not ask William. His obsessive control over the family finances meant one of two things. He either knew about this hidden expense, or he was dangerously incompetent. Neither option inspired trust. She waited until midnight. She retrieved an old tablet Arthur used for reading the morning news. She bypassed the lock screen using their wedding anniversary date. She searched for the storage company's name. The facility specialized in high-security preservation. They stored fine art, antique documents, and sensitive corporate archives. This was not a dusty garage for old furniture. The building required biometric access. It demanded in-person verification for any initial account setup. Arthur had to have visited Sacramento. He had to have bypassed his family's notice repeatedly over the years. Sylvia found a customer service number. She sat in the dark and waited for dawn. At exactly 8 in the morning, she made the call. She introduced herself as Arthur's widow. The representative requested a security personal identification number. Sylvia did not have one. She offered to send the official death certificate and her marriage license. The voice on the other end hesitated. The representative stated that the account already had a designated secondary administrator. Someone else was fully authorized to manage the unit. Sylvia asked for the name. The company policy strictly forbade sharing that information over the phone. She hung up the receiver. The walls of her living room no longer felt like a safe sanctuary. They felt like a carefully designed stage set. Her entire marriage rested on a hidden foundation. Someone else held the keys to Arthur's secret life. She needed to see the contents of that unit with her own eyes. She needed to travel to California. William would never allow such a trip. She would have to orchestrate her own disappearance. The metal door of unit number 412 rolled up with a heavy screech. Sylvia stepped inside. She expected cardboard boxes filled with old tax returns. She anticipated finding forgotten golf clubs or dusty winter coats. Instead, fluorescent lights flickered on automatically. They illuminated a pristine, climate-controlled room. It looked exactly like a corporate accounting office. A heavy oak desk sat in the center. Behind it stood 3 tall, fireproof filing cabinets. A leather chair waited, perfectly aligned. Arthur had not rented a storage space. He had built a hidden command center. Sylvia walked toward the desk. Her fingers brushed across the polished wood. There was no dust. Someone had maintained this room carefully. The soft hum of an air purifier filled the silence. She opened the top drawer of the desk. Inside lay a row of thick, leather-bound ledgers. They were arranged chronologically. The earliest volume dated back 28 years. Sylvia pulled out the book, marked 1995. She opened it to the first page. Arthur's precise architectural handwriting filled the columns. It was a detailed ledger of household expenses. But the addresses were entirely wrong. The utility bills listed a property in Carmel. The landscaping invoices described a massive terraced garden. The school tuition payments belonged to an elite private academy Sylvia had never heard of. She closed the ledger and moved to the first filing cabinet. The top drawer bore a simple printed label. It read, "Personal." Sylvia pulled the drawer open. Thick manila folders sat neatly in a row. She lifted the first one. A stack of photographs slid out onto the desk. She stared at the glossy prints. Arthur was smiling brightly. He stood on a sunlit patio, holding a toddler. Next to him stood a blonde woman in a white summer dress. Sylvia picked up another photograph. It showed a scene 10 years later. The same woman smiled at the camera. 2 older children stood beside her. Arthur was blowing out candles on a birthday cake. Sylvia turned the photograph over. The date written on the back matched the exact week Arthur claimed to be at an annual trade conference in Seattle. He had never missed a single industry event. He had simply flown to California. She returned to the ledgers. She needed to understand the mechanics of this parallel existence. She opened the bottom drawer of the desk. It contained thick stacks of bank statements from a separate financial institution. Sylvia began to trace the numbers line by line. Arthur had set up an automated diversion of corporate funds. Every month, a substantial percentage of his business income bypassed their joint accounts entirely. It flowed directly into a private trust through a series of shell companies. The trust had a formal name, the Pacific Horizon Fund. Sylvia read through the beneficiary documents. The blonde woman from the photographs was listed as the primary recipient. The 2 children were named as secondary beneficiaries. Arthur had purchased the Carmel house outright. He had fully funded university accounts for the 2 strangers. He had even bought them a 30-foot sailboat. The insurance documents for the vessel were filed neatly under the letter S. Sylvia sat down in the leather chair. Her entire marriage had been a carefully budgeted project. Arthur had always preached strict financial discipline at home. He had denied her requests to renovate their aging kitchen. He constantly claimed the family business needed a larger cash reserve to survive market fluctuations. That supposed cash reserve had bought a waterfront property on the West Coast. This was not a fleeting affair. It was a highly structured, parallel reality. Arthur had managed two separate lives with the cold efficiency of a corporate merger. He had maintained distinct spreadsheets for both families. He had allocated his affection and his capital according to a strict, unwavering schedule. He had categorized his betrayal into neat, alphabetized folders. Sylvia looked at the rows of files surrounding her. The sheer volume of paperwork proved a crucial point. A secret this massive required constant administrative maintenance. Arthur could not have managed this complex financial web entirely alone. The bank transfers required dual authorization from his company's executive board. The mail for the trust had to be routed through a secure corporate address. Someone had to handle the daily logistics when Arthur was at home with Sylvia. Someone had to approve the wire transfers when Arthur was sitting at his own dining table. She picked up a folder labeled Legal Correspondence. She opened it and pulled out a wire transfer authorization form. She looked at the bottom of the page. The authorizing signature next to Arthur's did not belong to a stranger. The manila folder at the bottom of the third banker's box held the heaviest truth. It contained the deed to a property in Carmel. The purchase price was $1,200,000. Arthur had bought the house 3 years before his fatal heart attack, but Arthur's name alone did not authorize the final wire transfer. A second signature anchored the bottom of the escrow document. Sylvia recognized the sharp, slanted handwriting instantly. It belonged to William, her eldest child, the boy she had raised, the man who had taken absolute control of her estate just days after the funeral. The discovery shifted the entire foundation of her grief. Arthur's infidelity was a ghost story, a dead man's cowardice. William's involvement was a living, breathing betrayal. He had not merely stumbled upon his father's secret. The dates on the legal correspondence proved active, long-term participation. William, a senior partner at a corporate law firm, had structured the shell company. He created the financial vehicle that drained Sylvia's rightful retirement funds. He funneled that money directly to his father's second household. He used his intimate knowledge of the family's joint accounts against his own mother. Sylvia laid the bank statements across the cold concrete floor of the storage unit. She matched the dates. William had identified the high-yield municipal bonds Sylvia rarely checked. He liquidated them in carefully calculated tranches. Each transaction fell just under the threshold that would trigger a mandatory verification call from their primary broker. He drafted a fake consulting agreement between Arthur's business and the Carmel entity. This document provided a legal justification for the outbound cash flow. The money appeared as a legitimate business expense on the annual tax returns. Sylvia had signed those joint returns blindly every April. William was always the one who handed her the pen. Suddenly, the events of the past 8 months made perfect sense. William's aggressive push to secure power of attorney was not born of filial devotion. His insistence that Sylvia was too fragile to handle bank statements was a calculated tactic. He needed absolute control to cover the missing assets. He was managing a cover-up. He was treating his mother as a liability. Arthur's betrayal was rooted in weakness. William's actions required cold, sustained logic. On the exact day, William hosted a lavish 50th anniversary dinner for his parents. He had also authorized a transfer of $50,000 to the Carmel account. He stood at the head of the table that evening. He raised a glass to his mother's unwavering dedication. His tailored suit pocket held the confirmation receipt for the stolen funds. He sat across from his mother every Sunday for coffee. He watched her play with his children. All the while, he actively maintained the spreadsheet that tracked her diminishing net worth. The physical reaction to this truth was entirely different from the initial shock of the affair. There were no tears. The sorrow evaporated. It was replaced by a crystalline, icy focus. A husband's deception destroys a marriage. A son's calculated financial abuse destroys the fundamental premise of motherhood. William had prioritized his father's approval over his mother's basic survival. He viewed her half of the marital wealth as collateral damage. Sylvia picked up the deed. She examined the notary stamp. William had executed these documents in his own downtown office. He utilized his professional staff to rob his mother blind. He assumed her grief would keep her docile. He banked on her generational conditioning. He expected a woman of her era to simply nod and sign wherever her educated son pointed. He believed she would fade quietly into the background, grateful for his meager allowance. She carefully placed the original documents into her leather tote bag. She left the meaningless copies in the box. The storage unit door rolled down with a sharp, metallic clang. Sylvia walked out into the bright afternoon sun. She was no longer a confused, grieving widow. She possessed the entire paper trail. The time for mourning was over. A woman who spent 4 decades folding laundry and signing unread tax returns now sat in a mahogany boardroom. Sylvia did not weep. The betrayal by her eldest son, William, required a different currency than tears. It demanded litigation. Could a 70-year-old widow outmaneuver a seasoned corporate executive? She was about to find out. She bypassed the family law firm. Those men played golf with Arthur. They belonged to the same country clubs. Sylvia took a train to the city. She walked into the offices of a firm specializing in hostile asset recovery. She placed the storage unit ledger on the glass desk. The senior partner, a woman named Evelyn, recognized the paper trail immediately. It was a classic shell game. William had used his power of attorney to bleed the primary estate. He funneled cash into irrevocable trusts. The beneficiaries were the secret second family and himself. The legal team deployed forensic accountants. They issued subpoenas to 14 different financial institutions. They traced wire transfers dating back 15 years. Every hidden transaction emerged from the shadows. William had been sloppy. He assumed his mother would never look. He relied on her blind trust. That arrogance left digital fingerprints across 3 different state jurisdictions. The accountants found fake consulting fees. They uncovered inflated property appraisals. They identified fraudulent conveyances. William had transferred prime real estate for pennies to shield it from probate. The money trail painted a clear picture of systematic embezzlement. William had created dummy corporations registered in Delaware. He used them to invoice his late father's business for services never rendered. The profits flowed directly into offshore accounts. Sylvia studied the financial charts. She learned the vocabulary of fraud. Terms like fiduciary duty, constructive trust, and piercing the corporate veil became her new language. She treated the legal preparation like a household budget. Every detail mattered. Her mind, trained on managing a complex family schedule, easily adapted to tracking legal filings. She felt no anger during these meetings. Anger was a useless emotion. It clouded judgment. She felt a profound, icy clarity. She spent her evenings reading through the discovery documents. She cross-referenced dates with her old personal diaries. She found the exact days William claimed to be on business trips. He was actually finalizing the purchase of a house for his father's mistress. The betrayal was meticulously documented. The counterattack began on a Tuesday morning. William was hosting a board meeting at his firm. A process server handed him a thick manila envelope. It contained a civil complaint. The charges were severe: breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, elder abuse. Simultaneously, Evelyn filed emergency injunctions. The courts froze William's personal accounts. They placed liens on his real estate. The legal net closed before he even understood he was under attack. His credit cards stopped working. His access to the company funds was suspended pending investigation. William tried to call her. Sylvia blocked his number. She instructed her attorneys that all communication must go through official channels. There would be no tearful family gatherings. There would be no explanations. The evidence spoke for itself. A mediation session was scheduled. Sylvia attended via video link. She wore a tailored gray suit. She looked at her son through the screen. He looked panicked. The confident executive was gone. He tried to use his old tactics. He spoke of family legacy. He claimed it was all a terrible misunderstanding. He insisted he was only trying to protect her from the stress of managing the estate. Evelyn cut him off. She pushed 3 red binders across the conference table. They contained the bank records. They showed the forged signatures on the property deeds. They detailed the exact amounts transferred to the second family. The ultimatum was simple: surrender the stolen assets or face criminal referral. The civil case was airtight. A criminal investigation would destroy his career. It would lead to prison time. William had no leverage. His entire scheme relied on Sylvia remaining passive. Her unexpected aggression shattered his defenses. He looked at the screen, waiting for his mother to soften. He expected the woman who always smoothed over family conflicts. Sylvia did not blink. She offered no words of comfort. She simply waited for his lawyer to advise him to accept the terms. The silence stretched for 3 long minutes. Finally, William nodded. The settlement took exactly 3 weeks to finalize. William signed over the contested properties. He liquidated his investment portfolios to repay the stolen cash. The trusts set up for the second family were dismantled. The law viewed these transfers as theft from the marital estate. The mistress was forced to vacate the property purchased with Sylvia's money. The house was immediately listed for sale. Every stolen dollar returned to Sylvia's name. She did not take a penny more than she was owed. This was not about vengeance. It was about balance. She reclaimed the commercial real estate portfolio. She took back control of the family holding company. The legal victory secured her future. It redefined her identity. She was no longer the naive widow. She was the architect of her own justice. The paperwork was signed and filed. The frozen accounts were released back into her control. The financial empire her husband built and her son tried to steal now rested firmly in her hands alone. She walked out of the law office on a crisp autumn afternoon. The city noise felt different now. It sounded like freedom. She hailed a cab. She gave the driver the address of her bank. It was time to open new accounts. Accounts with only one name on them. The morning sun over the Pacific coast casts long shadows across the mahogany kitchen island. Sylvia rests her cup of black coffee on the marble countertop. This house was purchased with funds secretly siphoned from her joint accounts over 3 decades. Today, the deed bears only her name. She did not sell the Carmel by the Sea property. Moving into the exact space meant for her late husband's parallel life was a calculated decision. The walls once held photographs of strangers. Now, they are entirely bare. Sylvia prefers the emptiness. It represents a blank slate at age 72. The ocean breeze comes through the open terrace doors. It carries away the stale scent of 50 years of domestic obedience. The legal transfer of assets took exactly 8 months. William, her eldest son, attempted to negotiate a private settlement. He sent lengthy emails detailing his father's psychological manipulation. Sylvia never replied. She let her forensic accountants and attorneys handle the recovery process. William lost his executive position at the family firm. The court ordered him to repay the misappropriated trust funds. He is currently liquidating his own suburban estate to meet the settlement deadline. Sylvia feels no malice toward him. She simply views him as a failed investment that required immediate liquidation. Her two younger children, Clara and James, remained strictly neutral during the litigation. Neutrality, however, is a deliberate choice. Sylvia invited them to California for the Thanksgiving holiday. She set rigid parameters for the visit. There would be no discussions about their father. There would be no requests for financial assistance. The family trust is now locked behind an ironclad legal structure. They will inherit what remains after she passes. The daily purse strings are permanently severed. For the first time, Clara and James looked at their mother not as an endless resource, but as a sovereign entity. The power dynamic shifted overnight. They speak to her now with a newfound, careful respect. They ask about her day instead of complaining about their own. Sylvia listens, offers brief advice, and ends the phone calls when she feels tired. She no longer absorbs their anxiety. The storage unit in Sacramento is finally empty. Sylvia kept the financial ledgers for the lawyers. The rest of Arthur's secret archive arrived at the Carmel house in 14 heavy cardboard boxes. They contained love letters, vacation itineraries, and receipts for expensive jewelry she never wore. Sylvia did not read a single page. She hired a professional mobile shredding service. A large industrial truck parked in her driveway for 2 hours. Operators fed the boxes into the machine. Heavy steel blades turned half a century of deception into compressed bales of paper dust. Sylvia stood on the porch and watched the process. She did not cry. She drank iced tea. The truck drove away, taking the physical weight of her past with it. The ash went to a recycling plant. Her calendar is no longer dictated by school runs, corporate dinners, or doctor's appointments for an aging spouse. Sylvia owns her time completely. She enrolled in a university extension program focusing on modern architectural history. She bought a vintage convertible. She drives it along Highway 1 every Sunday morning. The coastal wind ruins her carefully styled hair. She does not care. Agency is not just about controlling money. It is the absolute freedom to be selfish without guilt. Sylvia spent 5 decades being the perfect wife and the endlessly accommodating mother. That woman died alongside Arthur. The woman drinking coffee in the California sunlight answers to absolutely no one. She finishes her drink, leaves the cup in the sink, and grabs her car keys. The rest of her life begins right now.